Welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire.
What does asbestos management mean to you?
I used to really struggle with the asbestos management at my site, but now it's a breeze.
It used to be really expensive. I was paying loads, but now I've got my asbestos power team in place. It's so much easier.
Asbestos can be a pain in the arse if not handled right.
We had to stop the job because asbestos was discovered. Now we don't have that problem.
Asbestos management is easier than you think. Asbestos management. Be proactive, not reactive. Think about asbestos first, not last.
And now your hosts, best-selling authors and asbestos experts, Ian Stone and Neil Munro.
Welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire. So today we're going to be talking about refurbishment surveys and also demolition surveys. Well, I'll tell you what, let's start with refurbishment surveys. What's the definition?
So, an asbestos refurbishment survey, as the name suggests, is a survey that you would have carried out if you're planning to do any sort of type of refurbishment works. That may be a full refurb of a building, it may be just a slightly specific area, or it could even be sort of some large-scale maintenance, so electrical upgrades, heating upgrades, etc. So anything that's going to disturb the fabric of the building, you'd have this type of survey carried out.
Yeah, I mean, you also have a refurb survey on any old plant or equipment as well before it's disturbed or moved. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It's as per the name suggests. So what about demolition surveys?
Again, as the name suggests, you'd have a demolition survey if you're planning to demolish generally the whole of a building or at least a significant element of a building. So a demolition survey should be where you're taking the building completely down or part of the building completely down.
And we've spoken about these as refurbishment or demolition surveys separately. In the guidance, they're kind of in there as one paragraph.
Yeah, it's a bit muddy, isn't it? It's not exactly clear.
No.
It sort of throws them together like as if it's the same survey.
Yeah.
However, because of the intrusive nature, the difference between the refurbishment and demolition surveys is a lot different. Really, technically speaking, they are completely different surveys.
Yeah, and for me, it pisses me off. It's a real big bugbear, if I'm honest, when people say, oh, I just want an R&D survey, because they're kind of completely different. And it does annoy me as our industry kind of perpetuates that as well. And it's not. They are completely different.
Do you want a refurbishment or a demolition survey? Because the intrusive and destructive natures can be completely different.
Yeah, it's like poles apart. If you think about, a bit of damage is required for a refurb, but the level of destruction and intrusion needed on a demolition survey, that's like next level. So that's why they always should be thought of and considered of as either a refurbishment survey or a demolition survey. Never R&D, never that kind of stuff. That's just a real bugbear of mine, that's all. So when can they be carried out?
Generally speaking, these surveys, because they're intrusive and destructive, they have to be carried out in an unoccupied area. So no people, no occupants can be present while we're intrusively inspecting areas. So if you can imagine, these surveys access all elements of the building. If it's a refurbishment survey, it would be in line with the scope of works. If it's a demolition, it would be pretty much everywhere. And because of that nature, we're opening up the fabric of the building, elements of the building which is unseen. We don't know what we're opening up, and we don't know what we're going to be going into. So therefore, because of that risk, we can't have occupants surrounding these areas. Just from a general sort of dust, debris, but also there could be an asbestos hazard there as well.
Exactly. I mean, you don't want Sally and John sitting at their office desk while she cut a hole in the wall next to them, because, like you say, just general dust and crap is no good, let alone, whatever we do find within that void.
Yeah, definitely. So these surveys, they can be and should be carried out in all types of properties, offices, warehouses, again, houses, if refurbs or demolition are supposed to be carried out on those houses, domestic properties, even ships, boats, submarines. And it can be specific areas like floor ducts. Basically, any structure which could contain asbestos, these surveys can be carried out.
Yeah, a barn in the middle of a farmer's field should have a refurb survey before the cladding's replaced, or demo survey before the structure's taken down. It's pretty much any structure. So this is the slight difference between them. So refurb surveys, like Neil said, that they should be in line with the scope of works. And what we mean by that, it's the full scope of what's going to happen as part of the refurbishment. And we need it for two reasons. One, to make sure that we've accessed everywhere before the contractors go in and start their works. But secondly, to make sure we don't disturb and damage anything that isn't part of the works. There could be a first floor set of offices, and within those offices, only one element, the kitchen, is going to be refurbed, and the rest of the property is not going to be refurbed. So you don't want destruction in the offices next door. We don't need to access the walls and the ceilings and the columns everywhere else. It's only within that kitchen area. Whereas the demolition survey, it is the whole entire building as far as we can gain access to into everything. And the other thing to think of on refurbs as well, sometimes people get caught up with just the idea around the elements of the refurbishment, and they don't think about other things such as power and access to it. So, for instance, if a new air conditioning unit was going to be installed, how is power going to get to that? There might be power in the void that can be tapped up into, or alternatively, they might need to run a whole new power cable right back to the inlet. And the thing is, that whole entire cable route will need to be checked, because contractors are going to be going into those voids, accessing all of those things and running new cables through.
Yeah, refurbishment surveys, it is really important to consider everything that's related to that refurbishment or those works. As Ian said, if you're having heating upgrade, it's not just the actual heaters that you're replacing, it's obviously the pipe work, the boiler room, the electrics to the boilers and additional heater, or the fire assembly points, smoke detectors, etc. It's everything that is related to that job. But as Ian said, it might not be considered because you're only refurbishing one room. So that's really, really important. Isolations. To do these surveys safely, if we're punching holes into the walls, there could be buried cables, pipes, so they might need to be isolated. To inspect into fuse boards, if the fuse boards are being upgraded.
Like Neil said, the heaters as well, the actual heaters themselves, they'll need to be isolated so we can remove the panels, make sure there's no gaskets, lining, anything like that within them. So that's quite a biggie. And isolations on demolition surveys, definitely. We can't survey a building properly unless there's isolations for everything.
Yeah, ideally the building needs to be dead, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, like cut off at the mains for electric, all the services isolated and drained down as well. That's
gas,
really important.
power, water, all of them completely dead, completely off, fully drained down, because we can only inspect everywhere when all these things are completely off.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what happens when we go to do a refurb or a demo survey.
Yeah, so the important thing with all asbestos surveys is to gather as much information at the start. So a desktop study of some sorts to gather key information about the building, so what age it is, what type of construction it is. If there's any plans for the buildings, they're really good, and particularly for the refurbishment. Existing and proposed plans are really, really useful for the asbestos surveyor to get and gauge an idea of what's actually going to happen during the refurbishment itself.
Yeah, with plans like that, there's kind of no wiggle room then. You can get confused between what is a written scope on how you perceive that versus how the client sees that. Whereas with plans saying, well, this wall is coming out, it's obvious and you can see that. That's the best way to relay that information.
Yeah, and particularly with cable routes,
massively.
pipe runs.
Yeah.
If the surveyor can see exactly where those pipes are going to be running, where they're going to be punching through walls, where they're going to go into ceiling voids, then we can really marry that refurbishment survey with the actual scope of work. So as Ian said, we're not damaging elements of the building that you're not doing anything with, and we're really focusing on the areas where you are going to disturb. The key thing to remember is if you've had the asbestos survey done and the scope changes, there may be further inspections that are required. So really do remember that.
That is a biggie. Time and again, we've carried out refurbishment surveys on site, and then the scope changes because clients change their mind. The contractors, perhaps when they get to site, they can't route what they were planning to for some sort of issue. And at that point of it changing, either the client changing their mind or the work's changing, then you need to revisit that refurb survey to make sure it's still fit for purpose and it's checked this new route, this new passage that's going to be undertaken.
Yeah, pick up the phone to the surveying company and just talk them through it, because it may be that they may be able to advise you of a better solution to talk you through whether further inspections are required or not.
Yeah. Some other information that is good for desktop stage, any historical information that can be identified about the site, plus any risks as well. It's great. We need the clients to inform us of any known risks on site.
Yeah, particularly if there are any real hazardous ones as well that can be flagged up. And particularly if we're opening up the elements of the building as well, if there's any sort of like hidden hazards that they're aware of, that's really key. Yes, when we get to site, what will the asbestos surveyor be doing?
Well, first and foremost is they should undertake a walkthrough. Need to fully kind of get their head around the building to understand the building and the site, the scope of it, the size of it, the layout of it, all the rest of it. And as part of the walkthrough, they'll be undertaking their risk assessments, making sure the risks that they've highlighted in the desktop are correct. And also if there are any additional risks and risk assessments that are needed before they start their works. They'll also look for any suspect asbestos items, anything that's kind of waving at them as they walk around, anything they think, oh, I like the look of that, I'm definitely going to sample that. And then kind of plan and discuss access with the client, definitely for refurb surveys. They need to be unoccupied areas. So we need to discuss and figure out when is the best time.
Yeah, I always find this is a really good time to explain to the person on site exactly what's going to happen with these types of surveys.
And the level of damage.
Exactly that. So the surveyor would talk through with the site manager exactly what they're planning to do. So where they're going to be intrusively inspecting, what they'll actually be doing and what will be the end result. Because there are a few times where, especially when these asbestos surveys have been organised by maybe a head office or a third party, and it's the site guys or the site people don't always know and they're not always up to speed on exactly what's going to happen with this asbestos survey. So this is sort of the last line of communication, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to be left with this building that are on site. So that's really key to sort of explain that to the site operative or site manager.
Definitely. And things that we would explain, I don't know, say walls coming out. Well, we need to inspect within that wall. So the only way to inspect within that wall is to access the wall. And it sounds silly, but people sometimes think that we walk along with asbestos detecting machines, and it's simply not the case. We need to physically look and inspect. So if we were going to access within a plasterboard wall, we would need to cut an inspection hole out of that plasterboard wall.
And it might be various numbers, mightn't it? Depending on the size of the wall and what we actually find, and if we can see all areas of that void.
Exactly. And we're not talking a small hole, we're talking so we can physically see, kind of, generally speaking, probably about a foot across. So we can see into the void, we can access it fully, we can sample anything within that void that we need to.
Yeah, so some examples of intrusive inspections within these refurbishment and demolition surveys. So, as Ian said, opening up walls, we'd be going above fixed ceilings, so plasterboard ceilings, or where there's ceiling tiles that are fixed. We'd be lifting up carpets, and all floor coverings would have to come up so we can see down to the actual structure. If there's a void within the floor, we'd be opening up the void. So if it's floorboards, taking those up. If it's a sealed void, we may have to break into that void.
It's kind of checking everywhere where the works are going to take place and getting into those areas.
It's the actual fabric of the building as well, isn't it?
Yeah, we're disturbing the fabric of the building in a controlled manner to identify anything that's suspect within there before the contractors go in and fully disturb the fabric of the building. Yeah. That's essentially the whole purpose. And for demolition surveys, again, that's kind of next level of intrusion and destruction. If you think about what the machines do when they go in to take a building down, they literally rip it apart. They crush it. They grind it to drop the building. And as part of the asbestos survey, we've got to try and identify all the asbestos before they get there. So, I don't know.
It could be taking windows out. You know, we need to inspect below, in and around the windows, windowsills, within doors, fire doors, door frames taken off. Any sort of element that may be hidden within the building, we need to open up.
Taking off column cladding, beam cladding, literally anything that could be hiding a potential asbestos element, we need to take off. And because of that level of intrusion, demolition surveys definitely cannot be reoccupied afterwards.
We'd even take kitchen cupboards off the walls, wouldn't we? bath panels,
Yeah.
getting into everywhere.
Every nook and cranny.
Yeah, definitely.
So, once we've discussed and informed the site contact of the level of intrusion that's needed and they've signed off and they're happy with that, we'd also look for any no access areas as well and discuss those because, I don't know, for a refurb, perhaps there's a refurb in a room, but it's locked. So we need to get that key. We need to highlight that at the beginning so it gives the site contact the chance to grab that key.
Yeah, sometimes on these types of surveys, though, if there isn't a key and that's within the scope, then sometimes we can force entry. Or
Force entry, break in.
But again, that's all confirmed on site. We will sort of get authorisation that the client's happy for us to do that.
So we're all agreed, we're good to go. How are we going to do the survey? What's the first job? How are we going to crack on?
So the first job, once the site walkthrough has been carried out satisfactory, so the surveyor would have sort of planned in their mind how they're going to undertake this type of survey, starting in the location of their choice. Now, generally speaking, from my point of view, it'd be a top-down methodical survey. So first of all, they'd start on the floor that they're starting, and if they've got plans, check the plans that they're still up to date and relevant to the actual site itself. If not, then the surveyor may draw the actual survey plans. So it's literally a hand-drawn plan, which would then be transferred into our electronics. So we use CAD or Visio to draw our plans. So it's the hand sketch on site. And then they'd commence the survey. So it's a methodical survey. They'd enter a room and start from the top. So ceiling, walls, floors, inspecting all elements. And it's a visual, as Ian said, it's a visual inspection looking for any suspect materials. So once they've done that, then they'd concentrate on opening up the elements in line with the scope of work. So if it's a refurbishment survey, they'd look to, if a wall's coming out, inspecting that element. So using that information, they'd then collect any samples that they'd need to do. Now, generally speaking, the sampling process is exactly the same as for all asbestos surveys. So it's preparing the area for the sample. So it's a wet sample, laying down polythene, collecting it safely. So if it's for pipe insulation, would be core boring it. If it's a board, it's literally taking a cut of that material. If it's a cement type material, it's breaking a small element of that sample off. Floor tiles, again, it's cutting that actual material itself.
Yeah, exactly. It's just sampling in the correct manner for whatever material. I mean, you mentioned pipe insulation there, and it's vital to core bore pipes. I've seen surveys where asbestos surveyors have just taken a small element of the sample of the top surface.
Nicked it off the top.
Yeah, and that's no good because asbestos pipes have been overclad with non-asbestos items, had linings right in the middle of non-asbestos items. So that's why we always core bore and go right to the centre of things like pipe insulation.
Yeah, so because of these surveys are intrusive, the asbestos surveyors would be wearing personal protective equipment and respirators to protect themselves.
I mean, there's kind of two reasons for that, really, isn't there? One, for the obvious potential asbestos element if we open up an area, but secondly, it's just for the general protection from dust and everything on site. We're opening up horrible, nasty areas. Sometimes they've not been accessed for years and years, so there's all sorts in there, big spiders and everything.
And some of the horrible, dirty sites, especially on the demo side, and sometimes we even have decontamination units just because of the risk of what we're opening up, dirty, horrible places we may need to fully decontaminate.
Yeah, exactly that.
Generally speaking, on these types of surveys, we'd have some sort of localised decontamination in place. So that may be buckets of clean water, sponges, so the surveyor can decontaminate within an area, or sort of wet wipes as well if it's like a low contamination area, so they can clean their respirators, clean their hands, clean their faces, etc.
So for these surveys, we're working teams because the elements of damage and destruction that we do carry out.
Yeah, from a health and safety point of view as well.
Exactly. Health and safety, risk assessment point of view. You don't want somebody opening up an area with a big crowbar, knocking himself on the head and knocking themselves unconscious. So that's why we always work in teams for refurbs and demolition surveys.
Yeah, 100%.
So when the survey's completed, what does that look like? How do we finish up on site?
So generally speaking, what I would expect the asbestos surveyor, so they've opened up elements of the building, we would leave that safe. Now, what I mean by that is if there's a hole, we'd clean up that element. If the client had asked us to, we'd make it good, but we'd definitely leave it safe. So there'd be no sort of splinters or sharps or nails or anything like that hanging out that anyone that is following behind us could injure themselves on.
Exactly. We wouldn't leave splinters galore everywhere.
No, definitely not.
I don't know, if we took something off the wall and we couldn't get it back on, we would bend the nails back, things like that, and just stack it to the corner of a room. Like, this is for demolition surveys.
Yeah, and some of the refurbs, some of the heavy refurbs as well. But if there was an area that couldn't be sort of left safe just because of what we've done, to give you an example, sometimes if we're taking up floors, floor voids, if they've been down for centuries, sometimes when we take them up, it's impossible to get them back down. However, we'd communicate that to the site if it was still occupied, and we'd obviously restrict access to that area to make sure that no one goes in and injures themselves, really.
The other thing we would do, so whoever the site contact is for a refurb or a demo, we'd have a chat with them, either over the telephone or if they're there in person, even better.
Yeah, walk them through.
Yeah, walk them through the areas, highlight the stuff we've sampled, highlight anything that we believe may be suspect. If there's any areas that we feel might come back as asbestos and it is an issue to restrict access, we would highlight those areas. And then finally, we'd send the data back. We push it back from our handsets. It goes back to the secure server. And then that information's sitting there ready for the lab when the samples get back to analyse.
Yeah, generally speaking, now, these asbestos surveys usually form the start of a project. So if it's a refurbishment or demolition, usually the first thing, or should be definitely, is the asbestos survey. So the turnaround for the asbestos survey report, you shouldn't be waiting any longer than 3 working days, should you?
No, not for most refurbs. I mean, a really big refurb might take 4 days.
Yeah, so it's really important to get that information out to the client. Exactly.
Yeah, so the only other thing, just to kind of reiterate what Neil just said, it's about the planning for these types of surveys, especially refurb surveys. Need to get them in first. A lot of the time we're getting called in by clients of, we're starting
tomorrow.
Starting tomorrow, we're starting next week. It's been highlighted that we need a refurb survey. Can you come and do it tomorrow? Can you come and do it this weekend? We've forgotten to do it. And in reality, it shouldn't be the case. I understand that clients get carried away with the end result of, we want the new boardroom, we want the new classroom setup, we want the end result. However, we need to incorporate all elements of how we get there straight away. And if we incorporate asbestos surveys in the beginning and as part of the planning, then we do cut out a lot of issues that can be found later on.
Definitely. Hope you found that useful. If you've got any questions, if you look for us on Facebook, the Asbestos Knowledge Empire community, come on there and join us, and you've got access to myself and Ian. So thanks for listening, and remember, asbestos first, not last.